Preliminary thoughts on the atheism of dialectic. 1. That dialectic is atheistic is not a mere assertion, but a concrete and verifiable fact rooted in the genesis of dialectic itself. This premise takes its substance from the ontology of dialectic, which has its foundation in materialism, evolutionary development, specifically socio-historical development in terms of logic and the concrete facts of physical existence. That all things are in motion, that all things proceed forward into a process of self-negation, that contradiction is vital to comprehending a reality in motion. 2. The ontology of dialectic is not something that is contrived or fabricated, but something that was historically discovered at the right time of conceptual development, which amounts to an advance in consciousness. This consciousness was a historical, social development of progressive transference. Not fabricated simply means that dialectic derives from the evolutionary progressive order of nature. The consciousness of dialectic always presupposes a historical development. 3. Because dialectic is a critical logic in the most explosive sense, contrary to Nietzsche, to do dialectic is not merely to philosophize with a hammer, but to scorch the earth with an atom bomb. Dialectic, in its mature form, doesn't actively go after lower forms of representation because it already presupposes their negation, because it has already contextualized them, negated them as inferior forms. It goes after the higher, more advanced, manipulative, ideological, monological structures that were historically erected after the mythological structures. The mythological is inferior to the monological, but it is the monological that a mature dialectic actively deconstructs and destroys. Why should it lower itself, going back to the superstition and inferiority of the mythological form? 4. The concern of dialectic is comprehensive, self-conscious freedom. All that it does for the purpose of freedom. Because of this vital motivation, dialectic is concerned with exposing and abolishing all forms of social, psychological, and political domination. Insofar as religion is an ideology of control, specifically a form of abstract idealism, dialectic is set against it. And as we have already said, it presupposes its negation. Religion is one of the first forms that dialectic contextualizes and transcends. 5. When dialectic takes conscious aim at religion, at the mythological form as opposed to the monological form, it achieves a greater negation than all the negations that came before it, precisely because a dialectical critique is the most comprehensive, historically conscious critique ever achieved by man. For religion to survive the atomic critique of dialectic, it would be necessary for it to change its ontology. But this is not something religion can do. Its place in history, as a subconscious projection of man negating against the concrete facts of historical existence. Through dialectic, we come to understand that the construction of the religious world is nothing more than a subconscious negation of the real world. motivated by fear and desire for power. It's the fragile and socially oppressed human trying to comfort itself through the construction of an escapist ontology in soteriology. 6. Dialectic discerns that religion negates itself through unspoken, presuppositional commitments that contradict the assertions of its theology. It also discerns how theology negates itself through the consistency of its own logical development, an inescapable contradiction that comes from within. Beyond this, it recognizes the contrived essence of its form, which is to say, recognizes theology to be nothing more than the invention of the subconscious human psyche, egotistically projected as a concrete transcendence. But via dialectic, this is really just humankind deceiving itself with its own imagination. 7. Dialectic is not an ideology constructed by the thinker, but a logic discovered and disclosed by thought as thought informs itself from the concretion of what stands before it, from what it experiences. The thinker doesn't get to choose the content that proceeds from dialectic, but allows dialectic to inform content. This is another reason religion doesn't survive dialectic. Another reason that dialectic is hostile to religion. Because religion is an attempt to create and superimpose theoretically desired content. Dialectical logic is an evolutionary logic. There's no way to escape this premise, if it is indeed a fact that dialectic is not an idealistic construction. 8. Because dialectic is concerned with mastering and overcoming the alienation of existence in every form, dialectic from the outset is directly pit against the claims and existence of religion, against religion's domination as it preys on ignorance. In historical religion, domination is astoundingly asserted as an existential virtue. Obedience is superior to freedom. It would be impossible for a dialectical logic to reconcile itself with such an oppressive and ignorant view of the world. 9. In religion, mastery of alienation takes on the form of projection, which is to say, where religion encounters alienation, in the first instance, not only does it fail to comprehend it, sometimes defining it as freedom, but in the second instance, it fabricates imaginary concepts against it. These ontological facts, once again, pit dialectic directly against religion. Religion is reified alienation. 10. The birth of a dialectical theology as a negation of religion. Dialectic is not hostile to the word God until it takes on a specific ideological character. God as speculation is not contrary to dialectic, but dialectic severely qualifies the romanticism that humans attach to the concept. What is left is a real negative theology that eviscerates and contextualizes all forms of human religion and notions of spirituality. It's only through dialectic that a concrete and self-conscious theology could ever be truly grounded. This has never happened in the history of mankind. All theistic notions have been tainted by romanticism and human desire. 11. As the philosopher Herbert Marcuse has said regarding dialectic, Dialectical thought thus becomes negative in itself. Its function is to break down the self-assurance and self-contentment of common sense, to undermine the sinister confidence in the power and language of facts, to demonstrate that unfreedom is so much at the core of things that the development of their internal contradictions leads necessarily to qualitative change, the explosion and catastrophe of the established state of affairs. This doesn't mean that facts are supplanted by extra-logical or supernatural claims, or that these claims are superior to facts. It means that dialectic sets itself against the oppression of the positive in every form it appears, probing beyond the lie of its appearance, searching for the concretion of reality's interconnection and movement. 12. In dialectic, negation is counterintuitively the path to the positive, which is to say, the path to comprehensive freedom, which is the chief concern of dialectic. In religion, the assertion, imaginary projection of the positive against the undesirability of the concrete negative is the path to freedom. In other words, when religion is confronted with the uncomfortable facts of reality, it tries to create an imaginary world to pit against the real world, to escape into idealism as a way of coping with reality. Conscious negation in dialectic means that it is ontologically hostile to religion. 13. Once again, as Marcuse says, to express and define that which is on its own terms is to distort and falsify reality. This means that dialectic cannot take, and would never take, religious claims at face value, but would, from the outset, press against them in the most nuclear sense of the term. Dialectical criticism is nuclear criticism. Dialectic is naturally suspicious and aggressive toward the positive. 14. Dialectic logic drives the internal logic of any form toward its own negation, to reveal its explanatory incompleteness, to demonstrate that it is still the blind victim of unmastered forces. In the case of religion, this means that the human subject is deceived by the symbolic and phonetic form. Instead of seeing through the human machinations that make use of these forms, creating fantastic concepts and naive religious consciousness, validates them on the basis of authority. Dialectic shines a light on this darkness so one can see the actual forms that are casting the shadows. That is, religion is a product of man imposed on himself. It's a form of self-deception, claims without substance. But to assimilate them without dialectic is to fail to recognize the lie of their content and form. 15. Is dialectic atheistic? It's skeptical, but in a way that goes beyond mere abstraction. In what sense, then, is dialectic atheistic? In the sense that its critical application leads to the demise of cultural gods and cultural forms of religion. It's only agnostic in the most negative and limited sense of the term, which is to say, dialectical agnosticism is, first of all, not neutral, and secondly, undesirable to any culturally conditioned religious person. At best, it ends by claiming that humans can know nothing about God or gods, and more importantly, that the concept has been historically destructive and has no concrete value to the species. 16. It could be asserted that mythology has a value for the structure and order of society because of the values it contains. But this is called into question by noting that these values are the result of subconscious forms, existential reactions, as opposed to a dialectical logic, which would formulate them on the basis of a conceptual and social consciousness. Neither would these formulations be based on monological axioms, but would proceed from a historical and intersubjective consciousness with an eye toward comprehensive freedom leading toward the qualitative progression of the species. 17. It is the ontology of dialectic that makes it such a threat and terror to religion, precisely because it is a hypercritical logic, precisely because it is suspicious of the positive. The reason dialectic is antithetical to religion is because the specific claims of religion cannot survive the skeptical critique of dialectic. Further, dialectic is derived from material conditions, from the motions of reality, which would seem to presuppose the negation of the religious form from the outset. 18. No philosopher is a greater deceiver than him who tries to replace negation with the sophistical lie of a positive sublation, thereby calling it dialectic. For not all things can be or should be sublated. Some things must be transcended so that the species can advance into higher forms of intelligence and freedom. Dialectic discerns that religion is a primitive form that needs to be transcended.